Thanks for having me. I hope you enjoy the program about George Pullman and the Pullman Palace Car Company. Um, this is the Dover Harbor. It actually was a Pullman car on the Central Vermont Railway. Um, so George was from a family in New England. They were carpenters and cabinet makers. Pullman was the third of 10 children. He was born to Louis and Emily Pullman. His father was a cabinet maker, but business wasn't doing great. It was hard to support 10 children. New York State at that time decided to widen the Erie Canal, which required relocating houses and warehouses and other buildings. So Louis Pullman picked up his family and moved to Avalon, New York in 1845, so he could start moving houses on the Erie Canal. He actually came up with a patent on how to do this. And on the right side of the slide, here's that patent, which consisted of cranes and rollers to pick up houses and move them. He started doing that. Business was good. And then George joined and helped, working right beside his father. Often down in the mud, although impeccably groomed, the young Pullman was always ready to do what was necessary to complete an assignment fully. But he was also known for following a tough job by cleaning up well and soon promenading in all his glory with a high top hat and a long tail coat. However, he was always motivated to return to do the grubby work the following day. When George was 22, his father died, and as the eldest unmarried son, it was necessary for him to support his mother and his brothers and sisters, and he ended up getting a 20-building contract from the state of New York the following year to move buildings on the Erie Canal. However, he saw this as not a long-term solution. He needed to find something else because you can only wind the canal, you can only move so many buildings before you have to move on. So he picked up the family, went to Chicago. Chicago was in the midst of redoing their sewer and water because when they built Chicago, it was the same level as Lake Michigan. In high winds, the roads would flood and the buildings would flood. In 1857, the city council passed an ordinance to raise grade of the streets bordering Lake Michigan and the Chicago River by 4 to 7 feet. Pullman arrived in 1857. Chicago was a town with streets and sidewalks of uneven heights. You can easily see it right here in this road, which is the lower left. They were in poor shape, and you can also see an advertisement for people to raise business building blocks and move buildings. And you can see in this little cartoon where they got this building up on cribbing, they got horses, and they've got rollers, and they're moving the building. So he said, I'm going to give this a try. So the successful draining of the notorious swamp with installation of sewers and putting down gas and water pipes, followed by the elevation of the paving the streets, was not entirely happy for some owners of businesses lining these streets. For partners of these costly shops found their property now below grade and without direct storefront access or visibility. So as you can see here, they've raised the street and everything, but that first floor retail is now below grade and you have to take a stair to go down. Or as you can see here, we're seeing the second floor of a building that at one time was at 2 stories. It stood to reason that a resourceful Pullman, that if a building can be moved to a new location like he did at the Erie Canal, he figured out, why can't you raise it? And he was not alone. There were others that would join him as colleagues or competitors. This is the Briggs house, and you can see all the cribbing underneath. You can see all that they've got cribbing underneath here, and you can see there's a jack. And what they did, they basically placed corkscrews underneath the building and raised it in its entirety. That's what they were doing. They were disconnected from the building next door and lifted. And as you can see, people stayed in the building. They didn't actually vacate the building because It took a number of weeks, and they just did a couple of inches a day. So everybody would turn their corkscrews in unison to raise the building. One of the biggest ones that he did was Lake Street between Clark and LaSalle, where they raised the entire block at one time. It took 600 workers and 6,000 jack screws. Again, the buildings remained occupied. After Pullman and his team managed to lift the stretch of Lake Street buildings more than 4 feet in 5 days without disrupting businesses, they installed a new foundation beneath the block, and it was as though the business had always existed at the new height. Hard to imagine, but a year later, steel magnate Joseph Byerson was still marveling at the achievement when he wrote that a feat of mechanical operation the country has never heard before. The business on the block went on as usual. Not a pane of glass was broken, nor were people aware of the movements, so gradual was the process. The next building, and the last one that he did, was the Tremont House, which is pictured here. This was in 1861. It took 500 men to raise this hotel by 6 feet, and each man on a signal gave their 10 jack screws half a turn until the building had been lifted to the desired height. In fact, a U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, Timothy O'Howe, was staying at the hotel. And at the end of his stay, he was there about a week. He went to the front desk and said, "I'm sure it's my imagination," because he didn't realize they were raising the building. But he said, "Your steps out front seem to get taller. And I remember when I first came in, I could look in the windows, and for some reason, they're a lot higher now. Did you guys lower the street, or am I missing something?" So it was done so gradual that people didn't even pick up. So Pullman had made a lot of money at raising these buildings and raising blocks to support his family, and he was actually pretty wealthy at this time doing this kind of work. So legend has it that when spending a sleepless night in a rudimentary sleeping car in the 1850s, it occurred to Pullman that with minor but fundamental tweaking and significant upgrading, an uncomfortable journey could be made not merely tolerable, but luxurious. But he didn't know if this was true. He decided he was going to create the world's best, greatest sleeping car. Sleeping cars back then were basically upright chairs. They were just a coach. Some cars, the seats could be pulled down, but that was about it. So Pullman got together with Benjamin Field, and they decided to buy 2 cars. It cost them about $2,000 apiece. They were going to redesign and do a sleeping car. The other person who joined them was Field's brother, Norman, who at the time lived in Pittsford, Vermont. But Pullman felt he needed more money to do this. Even though they were designing the cars and working on it, it was the time of the gold rush and the silver rush out west. So he decided to go out west and make more money. So George Pullman and Philip Armour of the Armour Food Company decided to go out west. They wanted seed money, so they headed out west. Armour went to Leadville, Colorado, and Pullman went to Central City. Other people that were there at the time were Levi Strauss, who makes jeans. John Moeller Studebaker went out there to raise money. Leland Stanford and Mark Hopkins, you probably don't know, but they were big-time Chicago real estate development people. John and William Borden were part of the Hopkins and meat processing. They went out there. Marshall Field and Levi Ledier did not go out there, but they bought silver mines and made money that way. When Armour went out there, he found that people needed water to do their panning for gold and all that, so he bought property. He controlled the water and sold water to miners so they could do their prospecting. When Marshall Field and Levy did this as they financed Borden and his brother, in less than 6 months, the 4 of them made a total profit of $4 million. And $4 million in today's money is $153 million, roughly. just to give you an idea of how much money they were making. One of the first cars before Pullman did his sleeping car was what they called shelf or bunk cars. Here's an article from a correspondent who took this ride, and he says, imagine an old-fashioned passenger car with the insides torn out, and in their place, two benches running lengthwise of the car. The only modern survivals sufficiently wrenched to be compared with are some of the side-seated concerns which lurch and wobble up and down Harlem and New Haven roads to suburban places. Even these less vulnerable survivals of primitive railroad development are quite agreeable vehicles compared to the dingy, dim-lighted sleeping car of the year before the war. The real misery of these cars was not that you sat sideways and alternately slid into your neighbor's lap or onto the floor. The real suffering began when you turned to what was truthfully James of the advertising department in those days termed luxurious night repose. The sleeping car of 1859, where the berths were made up at night, was sort of the worst feature of a black hole of Calcutta and of a hole of an American slaver. The berths were made up in three-decker style, one above the other from the floor and within a few inches of the car. The beds were made up with macrame mattresses, sheets were none, pillows were none. You had a blanket to cover yourself and a greasy, shiny haircloth bolster to lay your head on. To slide in between these shelves and to slide out for them required the skill of a contortionist. So needless to say, they were not fun rides. So you can see in this car, in this drawing, between the benches, they just put a couple of boards, and then they put a boards above, and then they put another board here. And that was basically it. That was the sleeping car of the day. Pullman in 1859 came up with his first two cars. He called one Old Number 9 and one Old Number 7. These were cars that he bought and reconfigured. They were coach cars, and they reconfigured them. They were three-man company. George Pullman would send his profits back to Benjamin and Norman Field to work on the cars they were converted. They were basically taking two existing cars and converted them to 10 lower berths with 10 upper berths and a bathroom at each end, and that's what they were working on at the time. George basically had a repair shop out there, sold goods, and basically in a month with $300,000, which in that time was a ton of money. The other thing that happened is that when Pullman came back from the West, he got drafted into the Civil War. So he did what a lot of rich people were doing. He would pay someone to go in his place. So he did not serve, but he sent someone in his place, which I just can't believe someone would say, sure, pay me some money and I'll go to war so you don't have to. Here's a picture of a car, and here's a picture inside the replica, just coach seats. The berths came down by pulleys and weights, and this is number 9. So they came up with a design, and they got a patent on it. It was basically the seats would fold out. They would take the mattress that was stored in the upper berths and put it down, and the upper berths would fold down and be held in place with ropes and pulleys. Then they did these two cars and leased them to the Chicago and Alton Railroad. And here's a picture of inside the berth. Here's with the seats upright, and here are the seats folded down. And then you can see they place the mattress on top of the seats. And there's a pillow there, and that's how you would sleep. And then the upper berths would fold down. Then in 1865, he came up with his Pioneer. His Pioneer was a car that he started from scratch. Upon returning from Colorado, he struck boldly, commenced to fabricate from the ground up his first sleeper. This was to be his very own car, not a made-over version of some crude coach or a shelf bunk car. With the help of draftsmen, carpenters, and skilled mechanics, he produced the Pioneer. It incorporated what was, for the day, an elaborate and luxurious interior design to provide maximum comfort. The Pioneer was a little more sophisticated. Upper berths were hinged and folded down. So, whoops. So during the day, the upper berths would be closed, and then they fold down and they were held in place with straps and pulleys. And then on the seats would fold down flat and they put a mattress on top. So here's a picture of the Pioneer. And then again, the same kind of drawing we looked at earlier. And then another picture interior. It was, I mean, a lot of woodwork, very nice, velvet seats, highly luxurious. However, at the time, Lincoln was assassinated. And of course, Lincoln had his funeral train. It left Washington, and before it went to Springfield, went to Chicago. When it stopped in Chicago and on its way there, there was a committee who got the train to stop in Chicago. On this committee was Borden, which was one of the people Pullman went out west to, and he happened to be Pullman's banker. Marshall Field was on the committee, who was a close friend of Pullman's. And they basically convinced the people who were controlling the Lincoln train that the Pioneer would be put on the back of the train from Chicago to Springfield. So the only problem with this was the Pioneer was wider and taller than most coach cars of the day, which means tracks had to be adjusted, bridges had to be raised. So what happened was the Chicago and Alton was now forced to move their tracks away from the station and increase the bridge heights to accommodate the train. So the other piece of this is that Ulysses S. Grant had heard about this car and said, I'm coming out west and I want to ride in this car because I'm sick and tired of riding in cars that aren't comfortable. And I want to take it from Washington to where I'm going. So this forced railroads to accommodate the width and height of this car, which to me just blows my mind that these railroads would do all this work to accommodate the car, but they had to. And so then here's a Pioneer with, here's the seat as it was during the day. At night, it would be folded down for a berth, and then the upper berth would be lowered. There'd be a mattress. There'd be 2 pillows. So that gives you an idea. Much better than a couple flat boards. The other piece that was going on at the same time was Allen had developed a paper car wheel. And basically it was a steel tire with 2 steel plates, but within the steel plates was crushed paper. And Pullman always felt these cars were the ones that had the best rides, were the ones that had the paper car wheel. This was in effect for about 20 years that this type of wheel was used. Allen became a partner with Pullman. And so you can see the steel plate. This is a cutaway, and you can see the crushed paper inside. And this is a view of one of those wheels on a truck, but most of them were white, and we'll see some cars that have them. Allen built, along with Pullman, his paper car wheel manufacturing company at Chicago and Pullman. This is the building that you see on the right. So this building, all it did was manufacture paper car wheels. Now that his car was accepted and the design worked out, he started manufacturing cars. And these are just some vignettes you can see of the berths. And here's the conductor getting one ready. He had places in Atlanta, he had places in Chicago, and he had places in Detroit where he's manufacturing these cars. And this is the one in Detroit. But he decided in the early 1880s, he asked Colonel James to secretly purchase 4,000 acres of land west of Lake Calumet, outside of Chicago, for $800,000. The property was acquired from 75 different owners, The actual site of the town, including Pullman's, did not occupy more than 300 acres. The residential portion of Pullman between 111th Street and 115th Street had 531 houses. Pullman was about 45 minutes from Chicago, and the Illinois Central had their main tracks go right by Pullman. This is a drawing of the town. So this was the manufacturing part of the town on this side, and then this was the residential part of the town on this side. And then this is a fire insurance map just to give you an idea. Again, this is all the manufacturing over here. And then this is the residential section of the town. And just to give you a little scale, so this was the main erection shop in the administration building. And then this is the water tower back here. And we're going to go look at a plan just to give you an idea. Here's that erection shop that I just showed you in the drawing. And then the water tower is located right here. This is an early view. They had just started building Pullman. They built this lake, and here's the admin building, which also had the erection shops on each side. The Illinois Central, you can just see the signals here, went on this side of the property. So here it is finished. And here, this is a view of about 10 years ago. So here's the admin building. Here's the erection shops. On this side, part of the erection shops have been taken down. And now we're standing at the Hotel Florence looking towards the admin building. You can see the tower. This section of shops have been taken down. Some of these remain. The water tower is gone. So here's today's view. Here's the admin building. The shops are gone here, but these shops are still there. They're boarded up. And actually, the admin building has just been renovated. So here's another view of the admin building and erection shops from the other end. And here's the workers. They're leaving for the day. And what I want you to notice is everybody's dressed up. You would think a manufacturing place, they wouldn't be dressed up, but Pullman had certain rules. And we'll get into that further. You had to be dressed up when you left your house to go to work. And then you could change your clothes in the shops. And then when you left, you had to be dressed up. If you're at the house and you're outside, you had to be dressed up. So there was a dress code for living in the town as well as for going to work. So here's another view, and we're gonna go into the residential section right here. So I just want to give you an idea of where we're going. This is the architect and the landscape architect who had designed this Pullman, the town. And this is one of the buildings that the architect had done in Chicago. So here's the Hotel Florence, which was a hotel that Pullman used to bring railroad owners in to buy his sleeping cars. There's a park here. There's an arcade building here, which you could do your shopping in. There's a market building here. There's a church here. And then this is the residential. So you can sort of see upper management houses were in this area, regular houses, single family were in this area, duplexes. And you notice as you go further down the street and further down, the lots get smaller and smaller. And of course, the houses get smaller and smaller. Here was a school. The station was located over here. So we're looking, here's the admin building. I'm using this as a marker. So here's the Hotel Florence, and here's the arcade building. You know, these are not small buildings. And then here's the park that you saw in the drawing, and here's a church. This was the only church. And here's the arcade building. So the arcade building was really sort of an arcade that they took from Europe. You could shop, they had stores, you could buy clothing, dry goods, food. And you'll see this sign, the arcade building, lower than Chicago prices. And they were not. They were more expensive. There was a second floor. It had a library, but you had to pay to use the library. They had an opera house in the building. Again, you had to pay to use the opera house. This is Hotel Florence. This is where Pullman would have people come, railroad owners come to see their cars and try to sell them to buy more cars. This is also when they came for private cars. It was very stylish. This is a view of it today. It was named after his daughter, Florence. He had 2 daughters and 2 sons. The 2 sons were worthless. One daughter got married to someone rich, so she didn't need to work. But Florence, his daughter, wanted to work with her father and worked in the business with him. So he named the hotel after her. It's got a beautiful wrap porch. Inside there are fireplaces. This is a view of the dining room back in the day. This is how the dining room looks today. There was a school that Pullman financed, and I showed you that on the little map. There was a church, but if you want to use the church, you had to pay. This is the church today, still in use. Inside, it's very nice. There was one religion. It was Pullman's religion. Again, but if you want to use the church or go in it for services, you had to pay. This was the market building. This is the Illinois Central Railroad Station. And you can see the admin building in the background back here. This is a firehouse. This was the stables, because back then you needed horses. They had these wonderful mounted horse heads. It is still there today. It's a little tired. I think it's used as apartments. And the houses were very nice, you know, tree-lined streets, steps up. They had electricity, which back then for that time of the year, or in that era, most houses did not have electricity. Manufacturing workers would not be able to get this level of luxury for a house somewhere else. And so this would be a administration person's house, and then this would be workers' housing. And then here we go where duplexes and row housing, and as you go further down, there'd be less. This is while they were being constructed. And again, they're pretty nice tree-lined streets. This is the town manager's house. There was also an arcade building. And today it's still an arcade building and apartments above. So just to give you a little idea, the first permanent residents were the Benson family. They moved into town on January 1st, 1881. By April, the Pullman car shops were in operation, and by May, more than 300 people lived in Pullman. The original town of Pullman was completed in 1884. The average rent for 3-room apartments was $8 to $8.50. The rent for a 5-room row house with basement and bathroom with water faucet on each of the 2 floors was $18 a month. Larger homes for professional and company officers began at $25 apiece. Rents were calculated to achieve a 6% return on the cost of the house. However, the investment never achieved more than 4.5. Housing in Pullman was somewhat more expensive than in other parts of the city, but the quality of the housing was far superior than available to workers elsewhere. All Pullman homes had indoor plumbing and facilities and running water, advantages unheard of in other working class areas of the day. So these are some of the housing view today. It's still there. It's still a neighborhood. The town cost $8 million to construct. Pullman had told the board of directors, we'll make 6% because we're going to charge them for everything. They want to use the church, we're going to charge them. They want to use the library, we're going to charge them. They want to use whatever, we're going to charge them. They even supplied gas to heat the buildings and charged them. And if you couldn't pay your bills, that was not an issue, because when you got your check from work, they also wrote another check made out to Pullman for the cost of the rent, for the cost of the gas. If you went to the library, that was automatically taken out. You never saw it. You never paid a bill because they already took it out. There were two checks. Pullman would give you two. You would give one right back, and you would get whatever was left over. So the bottom of the rung, you didn't have brick. You had a wood framed house, single story, and you got a little concrete sidewalk before it went to wood plank. So this was the lowest of the lows. But there was a dress code. When you went out, when your kids went out, when your wife went out, you had to be dressed up. And there's some pictures of people going to work. They're all dressed up. And here's one of the entrance gates to the complex. So there was no town government. You didn't get to vote on anything. Pullman managed the town. They did what they wanted to, charged what they wanted to. There was no local newspaper. Pullman put out a newspaper, but it was controlled by them. Everything was controlled by Pullman. And here's another gate where people could go in and out. And then here's a section in the middle of the complex. You can see workers coming into work. This is a close-up of the erection shops. They also had a transfer table. So railroad cars would come out of these doors, get put on the transfer table, and then they get moved down the line and go into other areas to be completed, or in entirely other buildings to be completed. So this is the water tower that we've seen from a distance before. Here's another view of it. And then here's the water tower, and there's buildings between it. And then they had walkways so people could walk between buildings. And they built all sorts of cars, not just sleeping cars. And then, here's a supervisor watching the people work. And then Pullman Company was powered by a coreless engine. This particular coreless engine was at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition. Pullman purchased the coreless engine to supply power for the works in town. It was built by George Corliss of Providence, Rhode Island. At the centennial opening, President Ulysses S. Grant had ceremoniously turned the silver crank to emit steam to the cylinders. It stood in the transept of the machinery hall, the focal point of the show. Its fame spread, known as the Corliss, considered to be the most beautiful engine in existence. After the exhibition, it was returned to Providence for storage. Pullman's goal was to make his town the model of its kind. The workers productive, the complex a showcase. A smaller, horizontal, less showy engine would not have sufficed, but Pullman full well recognized the promotional potential of the matter. He advised the world of his plans that he took 35 railroad cars to transplant the Corliss from Providence to Chicago to be on display for all to see. It was delivered in the 1800s, set up that winter, and put into service the following April. It stood on a raised platform surrounded by wide aisles for visitors to view as a centennial. Only there he charged for the tours. The engine room was 84 feet square, 66 feet high above the operating base. Maintained as spotless as a palace, the floor polished regularly, and the machinery touched up once a week. Press releases and tour guides exerted its qualities, and painstaking resuscitation of specification and massive size. Total weight 200 tons, 11-ton walking beams, 38-foot diameter flywheels, 2,400 horsepower, propelled 3 miles of shafting, and so on. Exaggerated these claims may have been, the Corliss nevertheless delivered 29 years of comparatively free and incredible service. A subject of technical papers and journals such as Power, it was taken out of service in 1910 and scrapped for $8 a ton. So here's a picture of it inside the building, where he would give tours and charge to give tours. And it sat in this building right here. And just to give you a little more information on the water tower was 196 feet high. The tank capacity was 550,000 gallons, which occupied the top portion of the water tower and provided 75 pounds of pressure on the mains. Lake Michigan was the source of the potable water, while water for the investor used by the shop was pumped from Lake Calumet. Several stories below the tanks were used for light manufacturing and storage. So this is just a view of some of the locomotives that were used on the complex to move cars around and assemble cars and put them together and get them ready for shipping. This is they call this a dummy transfer engine. There were 3 of them. They were used to push cars onto the transfer table and move them to other sections of the complex. They were about 50 horsepower, and they were steam driven. And here you can see the transfer table, and there's a dummy car and how they move, cars from along here and then here to load them. And again, you can see one coming out of the shop now. And then this is just, initially, the sleeping cars were wood frame. So here's the platform. Here's the framing underneath for the floor. And then the walls were all wood, as well as the roof. So they had a design shop where people designed the cars and designed all the pieces used in the car. The benches, the chairs, the berths, lights, doors, windows. And then they had a centralized system for turning machines like lathe and all that sort. And then we're just going to take a tour of some of the shops. And then also the outside, they had cranes that could lift metal and steel when the cars were made out of steel. And then they're starting to lay out equipment for the cars. And here they're building all these platforms for the cars. You can see them as they're starting to build them, all laid out. And then this is a 12-ton steel press that they use for moldings on steel. And here they are, they're making patterns and doing rooftops, building all the stuff. And here they're doing wheels. You can see all the wheels that they're constructing. And here's just the wheels, and there's the axles, and they're assembling them on lathes. And then here's the trucks being put together. And then you can start seeing there's drawings here because they're starting to do trim that goes inside the car. And they got planes and lathes. And here they're working on seats. As you can see, there's a chair. It's going to be upholstered, and here's a chair. It has its upholstery. There's finishing the arms. And then there's benches. You can see another chair here. I just find it staggering the amount of people and materials. And then they did freight cars as well, and they did it on the assembly line. So they had an assembly line, the trucks would come, they put the deck on for the car, they put the walls on, they put the ends on, they put the roof on, and they built it sort of took the some of the lessons learned by Henry Ford as he did the car in the assembly line. For freight cars, they did that as well. And then you can see it here. They're assembling walls, and you can see some of the cars are made up. There's an end that hasn't been installed yet, but they're just lined up and they're being assembled in line. And then they had artists, to do all the painting on the outside of the sleeping cars. And then here, there's all these cars stacked, ready to be finished and ready to be shipped out. They also did sandblasting to get their car ready for paint. Originally, cars did not have vestibules. They had open-end platforms, and of course, when they collided with other cars, they tended to override the car in front of them or behind them. The basic premise of the vestibule was not new. Various designs existed, some of which were patented. Those used widely were patented by the Wagner Palace Car Company, known as the narrow vestibule. It just covered the width of the door. Pullman sued for patent infringement. The court ruled that each had prior rights to some of the features on the other. By 1893, Pullman's work superintendent, Harry Sessions, developed and patented the full-width vestibule. So even though the court said he did not have complete rights, there's an ad in 1877 called The Original Vestibule. The vestibule, a Pullman invention, has accounted the greatest safety device in railroad traveling, enabling safe car-to-car passing. It included anti-telescope construction to prevent cars from climbing over another in a collision, and it holds the train in a rigid unit, riding more smoothly and safely. So here you can see an open platform car on the ends, on both ends. And here, this is the narrow. It was just the width of the door, and then it had stairs on each side, and there was actually a door here. So a door and another door to get in. And here's another view of it. It was just the width of the doorway. And then here we are with the fully enclosed vestibule. And here you can see these paper wheels. And just a reminder, 2 steel plates with crushed paper in between. The World Columbian Exhibition was a pretty important event. It was dubbed the White City because all the buildings were white and they were all classical architecture. The only building that was colored was the transportation building. It was the first time electricity was used in public buildings. And this is a night shot showing all the lights on, which back then must have been pretty impressive. Here's the transportation building. It was done by Louis Sullivan, who Frank Lloyd Wright, I don't know if some of you have heard him, he's probably the most famous American architect. He worked for Louis Sullivan. And Pullman brought his cars in to show them to the public. And again, you can see here, these trucks have paper wheels. And then here's another view of the stage Sleeping cars, you could get tours. The porters are there to talk to you about the cars and the sleepers. The United States of America is to hold the World's Fair in Chicago. It is well known to all that it will be the most stupendous, magnificent, and comprehensive exhibition of everything that pertains to the fears of life and development in every form. It is now generally conceded that you will wish to see this wonderful sight, and that you will arrange to do so is highly probable. Therefore, the means of travel and relative merits of great transportation line of this country are subject of importance to each individual. So this is one of the cars that, we saw the outside, inside, all wood paneling, naturally finished, chandeliers, the cream of the crop of the sleeping car. And here's some more views of the cars they had there. Really trying to sell sleeping car experience. And to think, the Columbian exhibition, we all heard about it, but how important was it? Well, to give you an idea, here's a Central Vermont Railroad timetable for the Columbian exhibition. So it's a fold-out paper, and on the back side, it has sleeping car accommodations during the World's Fair. It tells you the cost to get from where you're going to Chicago. It has a map of Chicago at Dearborn Station. And then when you fold it completely out, it's got a map of the Columbian exhibition, and it has the important buildings listed on there for you to see. So here we are in, I am in Vermont, and yet the CV Pullman service to Chicago to the exhibition. And then when you came by train, you'd arrive at the transportation building. So I'm just going to show some cars here. There were a whole set of different layouts. There was one that had 12 sections in a drawing room, some that had 3 compartments, 2 drawing rooms, an observation lounge. Some had 6 compartments. There were all sorts of different configurations. And they were done based on what railroads needed for their lines. And this was Pullman's most popular car. It had seating that got changed to berths. It had a bathroom. It had a drawing room. It had a separate women's lavatory. It had a smoking room and laboratory for the men. And that's about it. So only you really had one drawing room. The rest were berths. But this was their most popular car. And then as things change and needs change, they got away from the wood. Here's an observation car, cushion seats, a little more modern. Another one, which is even more modern, bench seating, a little Art Deco feel to it. But they did all sorts of cars. Here's a tub, private car that had a tub in it. Smoking car for your guests if you did private. Cars had barbershops. Here's one in an earlier car. Here's one in a more modern car. They would provide services. So if you had to do business while you're traveling, they would provide a secretary who could write letters and send them on a telegraph. They had phone service. And then he developed a roomette. This was not his, but Pullman's, the company's latest invention. He had died by the time this came in, but this car provided 18 roomettes, complete with toilet facilities, individual air conditioning, and separate control of heat and light. But the thing was, it was private. You didn't have to go outside of your room to go to the bathroom and all that. So here's a roomette. This is some advertising. They made it look like anybody could pull down the bed very easily. So here's the bed. There was the sink. The toilet was underneath. You would flip the sink up. much like today's roulettes. And then they had advertising to encourage people to come and try it. He did a 3-tier sleeper car. Well, Pullman did it. The company Pullman did a 3-tier sleeper car, but it wasn't very successful, and it must have been pretty tight. So he did other things as well. He did do coach cars. He did what they called oh, bear with me a second here. They called them immigrant cars, where immigrants came in on the East Coast and wanted to go out west. So where they were just basically seats and berths that hung low. And then here's a view of that immigrant car. Wood bench seats, and then up here decks where you could lay down. Pretty primitive. And this was for the Chicago, Kansas, and Nebraska in 1889. He also developed L cars for New York City. This is the 6th Avenue L. Pullman aggressively promoted his product to the elevateds in New York. He had more than casual interest, for in 1878, he was elected to what must have been the original board of directors of the Gilbert Line, which then became the Metropolitan. It ran up Trinity Place and Church Street, then West Broadway via 3rd Street and onto 6th Avenue. This is a view of the 6th Avenue from 9th Street. It shows the first train with Pullman cars on the Gilbert Elevated, April 29th, 1878. Traction is by steam dummy engine and then intended to the valve and rod motion and hissing steam from view to minimize the startling of horses. Yet they're shy at clanging and banging on the rails and steel structure. So here's another view of that, and also a drawing of the interior. It gives you a close-up look at the cars, which Pullman provided 147 of them through 1886. The interior looks right generous, advises that this line provides occupant service with carpeting and tree chandeliers with improved kerosene lighting. Must be nice to sit on the board and then sell the board 147 cars. No conflict of interest. They also did he did some other electric locomotive cars. This was delivered in 1888. It was a unique boxcar locomotive for Hannison, Derby, and Birmingham. It was powered by a large bipolar electric motor. The original is pictured on the right. They took one and refurbished it, and that's what you see on the right. Pullman also did streetcars. This is an example of one. He ventured into the streetcar business in 1880. His brother Charles Lewis Pullman ran this division for the company. And I threw a couple of these in. They're just really unique streetcars. They were pulled by a patent motor car, 2-decker, packed with people going down the street. This was in Columbia. Then he got together with George Sessions out of California to build what they called session cars. Sessions owned a railroad called the Highland Park and Fruitville Street Railroad, where he helped promote and sell. Pullman sold them 5 cars. When he did, his passengers could ride on top, and Sessions would cook and sell food on the lower level. So this is the Heinz Palace Studio car. This was a converted Pullman car that J. Heinz in 1885 established for himself. He was a photographer. He took it out west and he photographed Yellowstone and other parts. But the other thing he did is he went to different towns and offered to take pictures of people. Small towns out west didn't have a local photographer. So instead, he went out there and went from town to town. He had a timetable of when he'd be in the town so people could come and have the photos taken. He would develop them in the car, and then he would sell them to the people. This is a Northern Pacific exhibit car. It toured going out west It touted how going out west and how scenic it was. It had a parlor car with a library in it. The library had 39,000 photos of all the national parks that J. Hines took. It had a museum car which was had stuffed animals that were out west, pictures, all sorts of stuff. And it was to promote people going out west and travel from the east. It traveled to the east and went from city to city and used as a promotional tour. There was even a cathedral car of North Dakota built in the 1890s. It was a traveling church. It would go into towns. People could come and worship. Even Rexall Drugs had their own car. It was done by Pullman. They had it so they could teach pharmacies and teach druggists. Of course, after they got taught, they could go into the pharmaceutical store and buy all their drugs to sell to the towns they lived in. They also had hunting let me try that again. They also had hunting excursion trips that Pullman promoted, where you could rent a train and you could go on a trip, go hunting and come back with your wares. This one was going to Tallapoosa, Georgia, and returning. From Boston, it was $50. From Hartford, $55, and from New York and Philadelphia, $50. Of course, if you didn't want to do an excursion with everyone else, you could rent your own hunting camp car. It was basically a car done for hunting. It had everything. You could stay in it, sleep, eat. They would take you wherever you want to go. You could go hunting. You had a place to go at night after the hunt. Pullman also rented cars. This car was the first one that Pullman rented. Supposedly it was his car and he used it, and it got rented out once in a while, but it was really his car. Here's George Eastman of Kodak. He didn't own his own car, but he rented cars. He rented this particular one. He had it designed and it had a piano in it. Though it was his own, he rented it, but had it anytime he wanted. Sorry, lost my place. So this is one of Vanderbilt's private cars that they had built. He had two of these made. This particular one had a fireplace in it, and it was fireplace in it, and it was lavishly decorated. So I had to include this. It's not really railroad related, but Pullman built a snow cruiser for Admiral Byrd, who was going to do an Antarctica trip. A bunch of manufacturers got together and they built the Antarctic snow cruiser. It was built in Pullman, and it was meant to carry people inside and keep them warm when it was 100 degrees below zero in the Antarctica. It could hold the plane could land on it. It was supposed to traverse all snow conditions, supposedly. So here it is being built. Here it is having round, smooth tires installed on it. Its length was 55 feet. It carried 5-passenger airplane on the roof. The width was 15 feet. The height was 15 feet. The wheelbase was 20 feet. It weighed 75,000 pounds. The rubber tires had a 10-foot diameter and were 34 inches across. It cost $150,000 and had 2-horsepower diesel engines that were hooked to an electric motor in each wheel. And the exhaust of the diesel engines were piped over the tires to keep the tires warm. So here it is. They were trying to put it on the boat. The cribbing that they had set up to get on the boat collapsed. It collapsed. They finally got it on the boat and got out to Antarctica. And then it just couldn't go anywhere. Round tires in snow just don't work. So it ended up getting stuck. They left it. They would use it, but eventually it got buried with snow. So here's a guy coming out of the hatch, out of the top of this thing, and that the car is buried under snow. I couldn't resist not putting it in. Of course, there were some issues. Pullman didn't pay their porters very much. Their porters made good money when business was good because they got a lot of tips. But when they didn't get tips and business wasn't good, they did not get paid very well, and it was a struggle to survive. The other thing was there was this little recession in the 1890s, and we'll see some numbers. The recession was the fact that for Pullman, he wasn't making as much money as he could. He was still making money, but not as much as he wanted to, so he cut wages. However, he didn't lower the rent. He didn't charge less for gas or fuel or to use the church or to do anything, but he cut wages and he cut hours. So you can see, I mean, this company was making a hell of a lot of money. You know, it peaked in 1945, you know, profits, 2 million in 1885, 4 million and a half in 1890. So here where the strike occurred, he was making some serious cash. But this is what he did. In April of 93, let's take a blacksmith and I don't, doesn't matter. An iron machine worker made $122 in 1893. In April of 94, he made $97. So his monthly income went from $60.25 to $35.88. His hours were dropped from 251 hours to 186 hours. So workers decide to go on strike. And it was a pretty hostile strike. There was a lot of anger. They burnt cars. It was pretty nasty. But he didn't want to cut into his assets. And he wouldn't give. They would have negotiations and workers would offer something and he'd say no. And the workers said, well, meet us halfway. And he would walk out of the meetings and said, I'm not. And in terms of big picture, this was a small company. But the other unions decided they would not handle a train that had a Pullman car on it. Since Pullman car were first-class cars, they went on first-class trains, which meant first-class trains had the mail cars. And of course, now mail wasn't getting shipped. So people were not getting their mail. So this is why the federal government decided to step in. So the federal government sent National Guard to Pullman, and you can see them here, these pictures here, but here they are in Pullman. Here they are in front of the arcade building, and this is the Hotel Florence. They've set up camp, and they protected the trains and basically killed the strike. However, the government said, you know, you're really a monopoly. We're going to break you up. The car manufacturing is going to have to separate from the management that manages the cars on other railroads. So they broke it up. This really hurt his reputation. He died 3 years later. They said he was never the same. And the workers hated him with a passion for what he did to them. So he was so concerned that when he died, that the workers were going to basically unbury him and take his body out and mutilate it, that he was buried in a vault under 8 feet of concrete so no one could get him out. So this is his tomb. And at that point, I think my time's pretty close to done, although I have some other stuff, but we can stop there. And I just want to tell you a little more about the money he had. So he had a will, and while he treated his workers badly, he left $1 million for free school for manual training of children of persons employed at Pullman to be known as the Pullman School and to be created in the town of Pullman, which maybe he was trying to make up for it. I don't know. His wife, Hattie, got $1,250,000. She got $50,000 worth of cash, and she got the home, their luxurious home that was in Chicago. Florence, his daughter who worked for him, got $1 million, got a castle on the Thousand Islands, and then got $100,000 to maintain the castle. Harriet, his other daughter, got $1 million. Now, Pullman had two sons, George Pullman Jr. and Walter Sager Pullman. And these boys did nothing. They were problems from the beginning. He paid Harvard to send them to school, and they were kicked out after 6 months of being at Harvard. They would date daughters of wealthy people, and then they would change girlfriends. Like one brother might be dating this girl. When he got done, the other one would date him. So he was so disgusted with them that he left them $3,000 apiece, and that was it. So that's it. That's the story of Pullman.
Les, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, now, guys, if you have any questions, fire away.
I have a question.
Yep.
I missed the beginning of part of this presentation. Is Pullman part of Southern Chicago?
It's a separate town, completely separate from Chicago.
And still active today? I can visit there today if I want to.
Yes, you could visit there. It's about a 45-minute to an hour commuter rail ride from Chicago. The neighborhood is there. The administration building has just been renovated. They have all sorts of history there. It's really actually a nice community. It's a mix of residents. I believe some own their houses, others are rented. And it's being kept done. Some, Hotel Florence is still there. The arcade building is gone. The market building is gone. Most of the railroad related buildings are gone. The main piece is the admin building and some of the erection shops. The water tower is gone. When we took it's not in a great neighborhood. Well, it isn't. When we got on the train and took the train, the conductor said, "Where are you going?" He said, we told him we're going to see Pullman. He said, "Okay, when you get out of the car, go down and go under the tracks and go to your left. That's where Pullman is. Don't go to your right because you won't be coming back."
Oh, okay.
But we went, and my daughters were with me. We had a great time. You can go inside the church. They give tours and talk about the history. And I mean, you walk around for workers' houses, they were really nice. I mean, they were top notch. I mean, the low people on the rung who got the wood frame houses, but it was pretty nice. And again, the porters really had it hard. When it was busy and they got tips, they made tons of money. But, they worked. The rule was the first day of the trip, you could get 4 hours of sleep. The rest of the trip, you could not sleep. You had to take care of the customers. And so you had to shine their shoes. You had to make their bed. You had to iron clothes if they needed ironing. And all the porters were called George, because back in slavery, slaves were called by the owner's first name. And George Pullman had his porters called George.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, you can see where some of this went.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, if you're gonna go, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. It's worth a trip.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask a question of Laz?
Yep.
This is Martin. I live in South Florida, but I grew up in New England and became a member in 1978, taking a trip to Island Pond on the Central Vermont. So that's when I signed up for membership. But when I was very young, my mother is from Kentucky. My father was a refugee in World War II, and so my mom's mother lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and she used to bring me down every summer for the summer to get me out of my parents' hair, because they had my mom had 3 other children, and we used to take we'd get on at Route 128 station in Canton, Massachusetts, on the New Haven. We'd go down and get on the B&O, I think, in Washington, and then we would go to the C&O, which would bring us into Lexington. And I remember very clearly in those, and this is earliest memories I have, but I was always into trains. And there were, I remember seeing steam engines going through West Virginia and stuff like that at that age, which was very exciting for a very, very young five-year-old, whatever I was. But I do remember one of the trips we took was on a 3-tier sleeper.
Oh my God, really?
No, we did. My grandmother, who was getting along at that time, she slept in the lower bunk. I slept in the middle bunk, and some strangers slept in the upper bunk. But my question is, did how many railroad companies had the 3-tier sleepers in service over the life of that configuration?
I don't know. All I read is that it wasn't very successful.
Well, yes, I saw your slide on that, and you said it wasn't successful. All I remember is I was a small boy, so for me there was no problem with headroom or leg room or anything else like there is on airplanes today. But and I do remember actually several trips, and I remember calling our porters George. And I always thought that was very interesting. And I've told my children the story because I think that is an icon or a mark in our culture here in the U.S. How every single employee had the same name. And it's always been fascinating to me how this all came to pass. And I've read, and I've been into trains since I was old enough to talk and walk, but it just I found this very interesting. And I rode Pullman cars when I was very young, and so I really have appreciated them, and the memories that I have from those trips are significant. And even at my elderly age, they're still very sharp memories that I have.
So I have another program that I couldn't do this all in an hour. So I have another program on the porters and what they had to do and what their job was and all that. But what I failed to mention, I also had taken a ride on the Pullman because the CV, Central Vermont, and Rutland had Pullman service.
Yes, I know they did.
Yeah. And many people don't know, but you would buy a ticket from the Central Vermont. That would get you on the train. And then you would buy a separate Pullman ticket.
A surcharge. Yep.
To get on the Pullman car.
Yep.
So there were 2 fees. And when George Pullman first proposed this to the railroads, they said, no one's going to pay extra to sleep on your car. And Pullman said, oh, yes, they will.
They were wrong. Yep. They were all wrong.
They were all wrong.
My father took the New Haven for years, commuting to work to Boston, but also he was a stockbroker. So he was down in New York like once a month, and he would take a Pullman from Route 128 station in Canton, Mass, down to New York, or if he had to go to Washington. And he used to come back and tell me stories. And I always wanted to know, what did you see? What did you do? What did, he would, and he was very good at telling me. And so that kind of sort of probably fed to my love of trains for my entire life. And so I was just very interested on that 3-tier sleeper, but I took one of those, and actually, when you brought it up, I'm glad you did, because it really sparked some great memories.
And Pullman and in the other program I also talked about, they did a lot of advertising. When they first started, their advertising was, "We'll bring your husband back safe. Pullman trains are safe." And as things changed and became more modern, they really focused their advertising on women
Yes.
and said, "Come sleep in a Pullman car. You'll have a wonderful night's sleep. You'll be safe. You'll be secure," which I found fascinating, that all this advertisement was geared towards women,
Well,
because it was another group of people to ride the train that they never went after before.
Well, they never appealed to them before. And so I think some very smart person in the Pullman company realized that women are the decision makers in many of the decisions that men make in life, particularly men that at that time were very busy with business. And if they needed to have their wives go with them, the wives were going to tell them, "I don't want to go on the C&O. I want to go on, another rail line because it's Pullman." So, yeah, I think it's fascinating how the whole company got started, and how the whole everything got, the way it was when it was. And I'm so sorry that they don't exist anymore. Now we have Acela, or whatever you want to call it, and we have business class on regular Amtrak, and it's not the same. The service was remarkable. Those folks would come by, and they took care of my grandmother at the time, and she was, she was okay, but they took care of her. And then it was just and and they would take me to the bathroom for example, and they were so nice, and everyone was George, as you mentioned in your presentation. So it made it very easy for me as a young boy to know who I was talking to. But they were all very, very nice. My grandmother tipped them handsomely. They did what they did.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm sorry to wax on about experience.
That's okay.
But I had some wonderful experiences on Pullman cars. I was fortunate enough to have them. So I'll shut up and let everybody go to bed. Looks like Colin's sleeping. Colin's had a busy day.
Yeah. So who's AH? They said Marshall Field's great granddaughter is married to my boss.
Oh, I saw that.
That's me. I'm not sure if it's great granddaughter or great granddaughter. Jamie Field. She's 46 years old, lives in Lake Forest, where her dad, Marshall Field,
a wonderful town. A wonderful town, by the way.
Lake Forest.
I've been to Lake Forest many times on business.
Yep, I was just there the other day. I had to deliver a vehicle from Massachusetts to Chicago. It took 2 days and deliver their dog, little Shih Tzu dog named Panda. And I spent a day in Chicago. I took the Metro train from Lake Forest to Chicago, and took a riverboat cruise, and then attended a White Sox baseball game as well.
Wow.
That riverboat cruise is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, I got to show a tour. The guy spoke very well and went through the lock system out to the lake. That was fascinating as well.
Yeah. He was, Pullman, Marshall Field. There were 5 or 6 big boys there who all lived near each other. And
wow.
Don't forget Carson Peary and Scott.
Yeah.
And all those guys. I grew up in department store business in Boston at Jordan Mash. And so, yeah, I knew Carson Peary. I knew Marshall Fields. I used to competitively shop them when I was a much younger guy. So,
wow.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Alan, I see you got your hand up.
What was yours? Go right ahead.
Alan, come on back to the camera.
He's coming. Go ahead and ask the question.
I'm interested in, gentlemen talking about the dual tickets. I remember very well. Taking the State of Maine Express off Pullman, going to New York City. And, the railroad conductor and the Pullman conductor were two separate tables in the ante room or side room of Portland Union Station. Portland Union Station to me was the holy of holies. I loved that place. And one of my favorite pictures is of these two conductors sitting there at their tables. But my question is, Factory Station in Boston, there was a memorial to A. Philip Randolph, who I believe was the starter of the first railroad union of porters. You know anything about him?
I know some of that, and that's in my part 2 of this presentation. Because in part 2, I talk about the porters and the strike, a little more into the strike and how they hired this one person who basically saved them. And he was the first one, as you mentioned. So I know I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but I do talk about him in this part 2 of Pullman. Because the other piece was, you know, all the porters were black, but the conductor was white.
Yeah.
It was never a black conductor. All the conductors were white, all the porters were black.
That's correct. That is correct. And when you got down south, as when I would arrive in Lexington, Kentucky on the C&O, I got yelled at by my grandmother's nurse who took care of me that I went to drink from a water fountain, and it said it was black only, right? And she grabbed me and said, "Don't you ever do that again." And I said, "Well, I need to go to the bathroom." And I went into the black toilet, and she came in and grabbed me and said, "No, you can't do that." And these are things that most of the current generation don't remember because they've all passed away. But there was a time, all right, and it's quite remarkable to me that we made the transition as well as we did on things that were, I think, very hateful at the time. But you know, in any case, it's just these are the memories I have, and I think it's good to pass them on. That's all.
Les, I had one question. When you were talking early on about the paper wheels, I'm assuming that was something to do, at least in George Pullman's mind, with ride quality. But what prompted them no longer being? I mean, was it government? Was it, you know, AAR type?
I think when they first came out, I mean, they kept them pretty long into the early 1900s. Because Pullman did think they gave the best ride, and I don't quite understand. You know, there's 2 plates of steel or metal, whatever they were using back then, and then there was a metal tire, and there was crushed paper between it. So there must have been some flex in the 2 metal plates, because you know I don't quite understand it, how it worked, but I think the problem was the cars got heavier and heavier and heavier, and my guess is the paper wheels just couldn't handle it.
Right. I agree with you.
Yeah, it reached a point where the plate got so thick that the crushed paper wasn't really doing anything except getting in the way. And I mean, I would assume if those tires got wet over time, they would get into the paper, but I don't know that. I don't know much about it. I haven't researched it. When I found this out, I just found it fascinating. You know, crushed paper and the wheel of a railroad car. You got to be kidding me. But, and Fields mysteriously disappears after 2 years. You know, they built this place to make his wheels, and then it was Pullman and Fields. Then all of a sudden it's Pullman, and you never hear Fields again. So I don't know if Pullman just bought him out real quietly or what happened, but it's kind of a mystery because they were in it together when they started, and all of a sudden He's not there anymore.
Laz,
Yep.
we scheduled for part two at some point when you're in?
I
I know
have
you're gonna-
not, I have not talked to Eric about it. I'm more than willing to do part two. And I'll leave it up to Eric. But I
Well,
haven't,
actually, lads, Alan is our program coordinator. So
all right. I'll let
Oh,
Alan figure it out.
Yep.
He hasn't got enough, he hasn't got anything else to do, right?
Yeah.
exactly.
I have,
Okay.
this is Lloyd Neal. I have a question.
Yep.
Is it, I think I read somewhere that Pullman made thousands of troop cars in World War II.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
He, it's, where do you cut? I mean, they made so many different cars. I mean, I just, I showed you like a smidgen of the cars they made, but they made everything.
I
They
didn't know
made-
they made trolley cars, for God's sake.
Yep, they made
I
trolley
learned that
cars.
tonight.
Made VCC cars in Boston.
Yep, they made all sorts of cars. And if I had to show every car that we had, you'd be here for hours and hours and hours. It's amazing what they made, but they were known for their sleeping cars. But they made. I don't know if anybody familiar with the Rutland freight car with the green and gold. That was a Pullman freight car. That was made by Pullman.
I grew up in New England. I know everything about New England railroads. I know a lot of stuff. Yes.
So yes, they do troop cars, and if I present again, I'll include a picture of the troop car for you.
Excellent.
I have an interesting statistic from my uncle. My uncle worked for the Boston, Maine.
Ooh.
And on July 1st, 1949, I was with him. He worked the third trick from 10:30 till about 7. And believe it or not, and he worked in North Berwick, Maine. And 23 trains traveled across his roadway where he was a gate tender. Out of the 23, 10 were camp trains.
Wow.
Okay, and there were 10 camp trains, and there was a total of 117 Pullman cars.
Is this 1943, Lloyd?
Nope, I got the actual postcard right here. And it was July 1st, 1949.
Oh, 49. Okay.
49, it was the 4th of July week before the 4th of July weekend.
Yeah.
So Pullman, even in the 1949, that's quite 10 trains, 117 Pullmans
Yep.
full of kids.
It's amazing. And I talk about this in part two. Pullman had the ability, they had so many cars located throughout the country that if they were at Penn Station and tickets were being sold and they need to make up another train, they had enough cars stored at Penn Station that they could make up another train, or they had enough cars in Philadelphia. They had, and how they kept track of all these cars, you'll see. Do I still have that here? Let me just.
Well,
can I
before the
start?
age of emails and so forth and technology, it's remarkable.
Yeah, it was all done by hand.
Yep.
I'm trying to see if it's in this one. I'm just gonna go really quick here. And I don't know how people didn't lose their mind. Yeah, here they are.
I lost my mind about 50 years ago. So
Well, here they are, ticket reservations and managing cars and keeping, how they were able to do all this stuff and, and organize. And when you think of all the cars that were out there, and they had to keep track of where they were, when they would need to be serviced, you got to make sure the linens are there for the car. I'm just
it's
astounded.
It is. It's astounding. It would be a challenge today with the technology that we have today to do the same thing.
Yep.
And frankly, that's what railroads do today, and they still don't get it all right, right? We
Yep.
all have seen that.
But it's just, it's amazing. And I'm showing you a little of my, the part two, but all the porters.
Do
Here's
we
the
have to pay you?
conductor,
Do we have to? we
all the
have to pay-
porters,
Yeah.
and
do
the
we have to
porters in
pay
the
you a
window, the
little-
cooks in the window,
Yeah.
But the advertisement, that fascinates me because, privacy, women's appreciate the Pullman single occupancy section. Short lesson in anatomy, and, the father's leaving, daddy will come back safe and sound.
Right.
And then they did these things, some things, they had beauty shows on the train. I mean,
I know.
anyways, I don't want to give out too much other stuff that I may talk about, but, anyways,
Do we have
any
to
other
buy?
questions?
Do we have to buy tickets in advance for your next presentation, Laz?
No, it'll be free.
Okay. Well, that's good. I've only been a member since 1978.
Any
I,
other
uh,
questions before I head
I ju-
out?
Yes, I
ahead.
that's not a suggestion, but should we all, on a count of three, say, wake up, Colin?
Yeah, Colin, but it's
Sorry, what?
there he is. He's there.
One of
Oh,
my friends.
sorry.
Good morning, Colin.
Colin, you didn't miss anything. Don't
But
worry.
it's
No.
still,
No, I haven't started yet. I'm gonna start in 5 minutes.
We're starting in 5 minutes, so
You know him, I think. Okay.
that's wonderful. Colin, you were the best entertainment of the night. I mean, Laz, no offense. Okay.